Wow, that was a kind of a sketchy entrance. Did you see that too?
Yeah, we're here now. That's all that matters.
Talk about technical difficulties. Anyway, welcome back, Scott. It's been a minute. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Leighton. It's always good to be back, of course.
And you had a good season?
Yeah, for me, it was a good season. It wasn't what I normally do. I did a lot of traveling in late spring, and so I was late getting my garden in, and I didn't plant as much as I normally plant. But I was talking about it in my live stream this morning that I just have very few goals in a garden year. One of them to eat a fresh tomato, and the other to pluck some of my raspberries and eat them fresh from the garden. And I was able to accomplish both. So I had a good year.
Wow, fresh raspberries for breakfast.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually mixed some in with granola the other day. It was just incredible.
How do you deal with the thorns, or did you get a thornless variety?
How do I deal with the what?
Thorns,
Oh,
or did you go?
thorns. So
Or
no,
thorns?
so I actually do have a variety. Heritage is the name of the raspberry, and they're small. And so it's a type of raspberry that fruits on the prima canes, on the first year's canes. And so it only fruits at the tip of the plant. And so it's easy to go in and just pluck off the ripe fruit from the tips without even getting close to the thorns in any way.
Does it produce as much as a commercial raspberry
Uh, it's relative. I think it produces as much as I need, and it's because it produces on the prima cane. It's just fine. If I leave the canes, there will be fruit on both the flora cane, the second year cane, and the first year cane. So I can get more fruit if I let it go a full season, and that's more like what a commercial grower might get. But I don't need that much, and I've got a pretty big raspberry patch, so it keeps me happy.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, because they grow a lot of them out here,
Yeah,
raspberries and blackberries, but it's brutal. Like you got to have gloves all the way up to your, elbow anyway.
yeah. The raspberry isn't as bad. The blackberries, I prefer the thornless blackberries because they tend to be longer and they tend to be sharper, and it is much more difficult. I would agree with you there.
Great. Well, I didn't mean to go on a sidetrack, but
That's okay.
you started because you made my mouth water thinking about fresh raspberries at breakfast. But
That's right.
anyway, all right. So let's talk about the weather. It's been kind of crazy out here. We've had rain in the summer and just bizarre events that have been occurring. And how has it been on your side of the Rockies?
It's actually been pretty good. It's all relative. Officially, in Colorado Springs, we are right on the line for the amount of rain that we normally get, which is not a lot. And so, over the course of the summer, 3 inches maybe of rain is what Colorado Springs typically gets. I'm outside of town about 10 miles, and this year I had 8 inches of rain in 1 week. It just the thunderstorms roll over and they're just sitting on top of my house. So I've had a ton of rain, which means the plants are doing great, the weeds are doing great. I'm not having to water as much. It's been hot. I still haven't had my first frost, and we're almost 2 weeks after the average last frost date. So, it's hard to complain about the weather when I can still harvest tomatoes in Colorado the second week of October going into the third week.
Yeah, you're on the good side of the scale as far as that's concerned.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a friend in Ohio, corn and bean grower, and he was freaking out this summer because they had zero rain. I mean, like none. And so typically it's knee high by the 4th of July, which is
Yeah.
the old saying. And he was close, but he was really seriously concerned that his whole crop was going to fail. Now
So
he's
did
been
he,
using biologicals for 5 years now,
Okay. Did it turn out okay? Did he get enough rain?
Still didn't get any rain at all.
Wow.
But because he was using biologicals and has been for a period of time, for whatever reason, the corn was able to send down a tap deep enough to pick up soil moisture or draw it out of the aggregates, which I basically tried to explain to him. I go, that's got to be the only way. That
That's
even
good.
if the taproot goes down 6 feet, you're not going to hit groundwater unless you have, or unless it's like underneath the tiling,
Yeah.
which is typically not the case because the hard pan requires you tile.
Yeah.
So you understand this lingo, which probably most of people don't.
Well, yeah, and like corn doesn't send that vertical root straight down to even begin to break through any hard pan or any kind of barrier. So that can be a big challenge.
Yeah, so maybe my theory was correct then, that it was because of the aggregates holding and storing the moisture like little sponges that those aerial roots and the horizontal or feeder roots were able to tap into them. And
Yeah, that can make a big difference. Biochar is one of those things that often gets credit for that kind of stuff, but the organic material that binds onto the exudates of the roots, you know how that is, and creates those aggregates. It's exactly that. It's little sponges within the pore space of the soil. And so, how was the rain in the springtime? I mean, if they got enough rain early on, it might have been enough to carry it through the
yeah,
season.
yeah, he did. He said he had a wet winter and spring. So they did get some snow, but of course it melted pretty quickly. But again, it soaked up into those little aggregates. Now, this is something that I've been anxious to talk to someone who understands aggregation, and that is that we did a project where I've been working with this company, ESS, Ecosphere Sciences, and at some point I'm going to get you some of this muncher juicer. They're calling it F5.
Okay.
We did an experiment with tomatoes and sand, and Ken can probably bring up the pictures for it because he did last time. And what happened was we ran the test, and then the guy that was doing the test kind of neglected it after, I think it was 2.5, 3 months. He was traveling, lost interest in it, forgot about it, whatever. And it wasn't until 9 months into the experiment that I finally connected with him, because he's 3.5 hours south of me. And
Okay.
it's just no fun driving in LA traffic all the way down to Laguna Beach. So finally we figured out a time. I wasn't busy. I could afford to take a day off or a day and a half off. And I drove down and got him. When I brought him back, I cut a hole in the bucket to see how, what happened. Like, did we form soil like is typical when you're using a dissolved organic matter?
Mhm.
And lo and behold, we created 4 inches of topsoil in sand.
Wow.
I sent it off for textual testing at Logan Labs, and we increased silt 5x, we increased clay 2x, and we
Wow.
increased organic matter 5x.
Wow.
And listen to this, it gets crazier. We formed aggregates in sand.
Well, so I can believe the aggregation because I've got pretty sandy soil, and over time I can develop some good aggregates by just adding the organic matter like that, and getting that life, the microbes and everything moving into the soil. But to actually see a change in the silt and the clay, the particle size, that's incredible to me.
Yeah, I have no real answer at this point in time other than the bacteria did it.
Yeah.
But we're working with Los Alamos National Labs. We're doing some experiments in 2025. They'll wrap up in December. And they're repeating the tomatoes in sand, except for they're going to grow sorghum in sand because we just kind of ran out of time. There was a lot of stuff that had to happen. We had to get through Biosafety Commission and some other things because we are playing with microbes, and we did
Sure.
hot on some, I want to call them background noise. Like there's everything in the soil, right? So it's not like we're plating or culturing those bad guys, but they were present in the background. So
Sure.
typically they'll be outcompeted in a healthy soil system. But anyway, we set off an alarm, and we had to go through, let them DNA sequence it.
Really?
Yeah, just to verify that, they didn't have to do level 2 or level 3. And
Wow.
nobody's allowed to do level 4 because it's death.
Wow.
They take this stuff really seriously, and it's good.
Yeah.
It's good. I appreciate the level of safety because we don't want to expose ourselves to something that we can't see and is not really detectable as far as like
Yeah.
I can't identify botulinum with a microscope, right? It's some
Exactly.
pathogens that I can't. I just don't have the ability. So getting through that was a challenge, but we successfully did it. But we lost about a month and a half. So now instead of having a 90-day test window, we only have about a 45-day test window.
Oh, okay.
So that's why
Interesting.
we shifted to grass, which we can get up to speed, not completely to seed, but up to speed in a relatively short period of time, so we can collect the data.
Yeah. Yeah. At least you've got some data to show root development
Yep.
and germination and all those other things that are measured when you're trying to test plants.
Yeah, we had in our experiment with Agarin, which was last fall into I think it was about February. We showed consecutively 100% seed germination with this product, where
Wow.
in their compost they were sketchy at best, like 60% seed germination. So this MJ has some crazy qualities, and I'd love to go down that rabbit hole. Maybe we'll spend some time on it
Yeah.
today. But
Yeah. Okay.
needless to say, the aggregates were highly stable. The soil was chocolate rich. It smelled good. The plant itself was significantly bigger, as far as like what I want to call the rhizome sheath, which is below the soil. So that's where all the
Okay.
network of roots are. And when you pull it up, it's a big clod, right? Whereas the one in Miracle Grow, I just basically pulled the plant out of the soil. There was nothing hanging from it. I mean, then that plant got hornworms, and
Hmm.
it basically died after about 3 months. And crazy enough, but the control, which was water only, was actually hanging on by a thread. And again, he totally neglected it. Now, he's on the coast of Laguna, so it does get some dew in the mornings. So I think that was the saving grace. If it had been further inland and with no dew, I doubt that the experiment would have survived as long as it
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. It's amazing the impact of not just the dew, but the humidity, because when the plant begins transpiration in the morning and it's a moist environment and there's some dew on the plants, it doesn't require a lot of water coming from the roots through the system. So it doesn't put as much strain on the plant, and it can actually transpire pretty effectively in a low water or an environment where it's being neglected.
Yeah, and the other benefit too was that they have what's called the marine layer, so they don't get that screaming hot sun. It's basically pretty much May, June, and July is overcast here, which is to me awesome because if I want to get hot, I drive 5 miles inland, and
That's
the
right.
sun is out and it's blazing.
That's true.
So anyway, and the other interesting factor was there it is. See the bucket on
Okay.
the left?
Wow.
And when I pulled that bucket on the left apart, see how big the root ball is or the rhizome sheath?
Yeah.
It was way bigger than that. Like when I pulled it out, I lost a lot of it because I pulled too. I got aggressive and I just pulled it. I should have just like carefully like shook it and dug my fingers in there and pulled it out, because when I pulled that bucket apart, it was probably almost the size of the bucket itself and more like a inverted V. So
Okay. That's
anyway,
pretty cool.
so the interesting part about working with this gentleman who's a financier was when he was applying we did an application, 10-to-1 dilution, followed the Miracle Grow on its dilution, and then water was just water only. Basically, it was like 2 cups of the nutrient or water, depending on which plant it was talking about. Then we waited a month and did another application, and that was it. And then from there on, it was water only when he remembered to do it. And the interesting thing was like when he saw the reaction to the Miracle Grow, he's like, oh, Miracle Grow's kicking MJ's ass. And I'm like, well, why don't you expand? He goes, well, the plant's way taller and it's got more leaves. And I go, well, all right, hang on. What about flowers? And he goes, well, what do you mean? I go, well, flowers are an indication of fruiting sites.
Yeah.
And that's what we really want. We don't care about how big the plant gets. We just want the yields, as many tomatoes as we can possibly get. And he goes, well, I don't really see a lot of them. I go, all right, dude, get on your hands and knees and look in the bush.
That's right.
In there, look, right? It took me, I had to yell at him. We laugh about it to this day. But he did. He got on his hands and knees. He goes, oh my God, 1, 2, 3, 25. There's like 30 of them. I'm like, how many is on the Miracle Grow? He goes, maybe 10.
Wow.
I'm like, all right, see, this is what I'm talking about, is like, you have to start to learn to observe nature.
Yeah.
And incidentally, he had put some muncher juice on his grapevines and they exploded, like to the point where he had to build a trellis. The building commissioner came aside and said, no, you can't have that door blocked by this vine. You've got to build a trellis and get the vine and the leaves out of the way of the door for fire reasons. And so he did that. And then ironically, this fall, I got a call from him and he said, Leighton, you're not going to believe this. I'm like, well, what? Talk to me. He goes, I got grapes. I'm like,
Nice.
Well, doesn't the vine always produce grapes? And he goes, well, yeah, maybe a couple, but my neighbor doesn't have any. And I got bunches of grapes. And he goes, they're sweet. I go, what do you mean? They're sour before? He goes, oh God, they're nasty. We never eat them. I let them for the birds eat them. And I'm like, see the power of biology?
Exactly. That's why the soil matters. I mean, it makes a huge difference.
It's crazy. And I wish more people would get it and like do side by side so that they can actually see the difference and then taste the difference, right? And that's when you win them over. But the hard part is getting them to do that.
It's so easy. So many gardeners are sold on the idea that you have to use fertilizer, and they use fertilizer and they get good results. They get the big bushy plant and they get 10 flowers, and they harvest some fruit that tastes okay. It's always going to be better than the store, even if it isn't what it's supposed to be. And it isn't until they build the soil and do away with the fertilizer that they realize they could get 30 flowers and good tasting fruit. And it's taking that leap. It's the step off of the ledge that I think a lot of people just aren't willing to do because everything's okay. Why change if everything's okay? And we know it can be better if you take that step.
Yeah. And in my experience, it has always been the challenge was to do that. And, you're obviously an influencer. You obviously have a good following of people that, understand the power of what you're doing. But how do you make converts? How do you get people that are NPK addicts to join?
Yeah, my approach has always been talk about the science, demonstrate it, and then show the results. And I can tell you on my channel there are thousands of converts who are building their soil. They're not using the fertilizers because that's the way I do it. And while my season is very short in Colorado, during those critical months when I'm making the videos that shows the big bushy tomato plants and the wonderful harvest I'm getting, that's enough to convert a portion. I still get a lot of people, not nasty necessarily, but just making comments because of the videos that I make in the fall, in the winter, in the early spring, where nothing is growing in my garden. That's like, why should we listen to this guy? Because obviously there's nothing growing in his garden. Well, they don't understand that you can't grow anything in Colorado in February. It's the people that can look past that and actually want to learn and want to try something better. Those are the people I think are more willing to become converts. And it's just demonstration and proving that it works.
Yeah. And that's the fact. It's let me touch the nail holes of Jesus's palm before I'm going to believe that was the dude that rose back up out of the grave.
Yeah.
But that in my world is the biggest challenge. And I've taken a different approach over the course of the last couple of years where I start when someone asks me, well, what's the NPK in muncher juice? And I'm like, well, I want you to think about something first. I go, I think we need to talk about CNPK,
Yeah.
because NPK doesn't work without C. Like you
Yeah.
need carbon for the microbes to eat the NPK or eat specifically the nitrogen to convert it into a plant usable form. So if you just continue to apply NPK to your soil and you never cover crop or add mulch or any kind of compost to it, you're just disintegrating. You're in a downward spiral. You're gobbling up your carbon to a point where eventually you're going to be like the Midwest, where there's hard to grow anything without the NPK because you don't have the carbon.
Well, and because we don't apply carbon to our plants in a liquid soluble form that comes out of a plastic bottle, people don't stop. And if they had chemistry in high school, they don't pause and think, what's causing the structure of this plant to actually be created? What is this plant built from? Well, it must be something in the soil. And they don't, take that next step to think that it's actually what's in the air all around us that causes the plant to live, that creates that interface that you're talking about and introduces the carbon into the soil. And if you lose that, carbon sequestration is one of those things that in some arenas has a bad name because of its association with a greenhouse effect. But carbon sequestration is necessary for the planet, for all of the plants in some form or other. Or like you say, you've got to rely completely on the nutrients for the plant to grow.
Yep. And you're degrading your soil.
Yeah.
Simultaneously.
Yeah. So the carbon in plants, we talk about compost piles being a mix of the carbons and the nitrogens for it to decompose. But I agree with you. There's very little discussion about how the compost actually improves the soil. And it's that carbon factor of the compost that actually gives the structure to our plants as it becomes usable.
So there's this awesome woman, Colorado State, Lynn Cartufa, C of U. You got to read her papers.
Okay.
Oh my God. So for 13 years, because her first paper came out, I think it was 2 years ago. So for 13 or 14 years, because it's been a minute, I always wondered why, when I applied my compost extract to soil, that I had such incredible plant reaction. So she deep dives on what's called dissolved organic.
Okay.
And how the plant exudates are the dissolved organic matter. And that's like 1 to 2% max of the overall soil organic pool. And she goes, and in rain events, if you have a decomposed organic matter or mat on top, maybe a little of that water is going to pull some humics and fulvics out of that decomposed matter and add to that pool. But again, she goes, 1 to 2% is the max. So when I take, my biologically complete compost, my worm castings, and my fish brew, which is also a tremendous amount of dissolved organic matter, because when a fish poops, it's like poof. It's just organic matter floating in the water. I mix them, and then I make my liquid extract, and then I apply it, and stuff just blows up. And so finally, I had the reason why, and it's called dissolved organic matter. And so, I've always pushed people to take if they're going to buy some compost, I try to encourage them to say, hey, put a couple handfuls in a 5-gallon bucket, add 4 gallons of water, use a cordless drill on low paint mixer or cement mixer or mortar mixer, whatever, and work it for 5, 10, 15 minutes, and then pour it on, and mix in any of the solids that are sitting on the top. Kind of just stir it in with your finger so you don't get like a mat of anaerobic pocket. And that should be your approach to using this. Like I got no problem with you just spreading it on the soil, but you're going to lose 50% of it due to oxidization or
Right.
away, or because you're not covering it with mulch. So if these are your two choices: is put the compost down, water in, cover it with mulch, or make this dissolved organic matter and use that as a source to push biology and the carbon down into the soil. Is that something that you talk to your people about?
Well, and so, yeah, I don't know that much about those dissolved organics, though I do, and I've made videos that encourage making extracts. I don't call them a tea; I call them an extract, just like you. When you dissolve compost, or uh, dandelion with comfrey with stinging nettle is a blend that I do, where I'll just harvest the leaves and then I'll just let them dissolve in the water and do the same thing that you're talking about. But I never thought of it necessarily as the dissolved organics making it into the soil. I have talked about the easy method that you were just discussing, using compost as a mulch for that reason. And so I'll spread compost on top of the soil with the intent of watering and rain and snow melt, bringing some of that decomposed material into the soil, both with the natural leaching and with the soil life bringing it down. But yeah, I'm gonna have to look more into the actual science behind the dissolved organics, just to get a better feel for that, because I'm doing it, but I'm not doing it where I'm creating the compost extract and then pouring it onto the soil for that reason.
So we would consider that a plant ferment, where you take the plants and you put them in a bucket of water. I'm assuming you put something on top of it to kind of hold them under the water.
Uh, I just keep stacking more onto it. I leave it open and let the rain fall into it as
I
well.
love it. I love it. We call those
Yeah,
lazy man loads. Just do it,
exactly.
nature, work it out. Well, maybe this is be a fun experiment for you next season, or maybe you can do one this year. It doesn't really matter. Just put some hardware cloth down on top of it and try to get it so that it's underneath the water. And you'll see this magic phenomenon where all of a sudden you come back one day and then there's a white foam on the top of it. That white foam is an endophytic plume. So I'm
Okay.
talking about the bacteria and the protozoa that were trapped in the plant matter, because you've turned the plant matter into kind of mush,
Yeah.
allows them to escape out. And it seems like, well, out here we have a very, very high UV. And when the sun is out, it's hot.
Yeah.
And it took about 4 days. And I was using kelp, which is, a really tough plant. But it took 4 or 5 days, and I saw that foam. And of course, I ran back to my microscope, checked it out, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So a great way to pull the endophytic beneficials, the nutrient cyclers out of your plants. And
Interesting.
that's something that natural farming doesn't talk about. They talk
Yeah.
about just making the extract, but not like getting it to a point where you're getting a free biological bump on top of the nutrients that you get out of the plant.
Yeah, I like that idea. Yeah, because they're definitely fermenting. You can tell by the smell that the uh, the the bacteria, the anaerobic bacteria, are well in at work in that bucket. Uh,
Well established. Yeah. Well, the
yeah,
interesting thing was, right, and this is something I noticed when I was playing with anaerobic fish manure, was that once you aerobically stabilize it, you get this kind of interesting musty smell. It's not bad.
yeah,
It's different. And it's kind of like, how your nose, when it smells something bad, you're like, oh, get away from me, or smells something good, you're like, oh,
yeah,
bring it on. Well, this is something in between, and your nose doesn't know how to identify it. So it makes you kind of go, ooh, what is that smell?
yeah. Because I'll take I'll take that, and like this year, I just applied it. I just poured it all over my raspberry patch, and initially it had the bad aroma, and then I watered it in a little bit, and then you're right. It doesn't take long for that new smell that it's hard to identify what it is.
Yeah. So when you get that foam, that's what you get for a smell. It doesn't smell bad. It just smells different. It like confuses you. And so,
Interesting.
Yeah, so I dumped that on my compost pile. 2 weeks later, I microscoped it. It was like, oh my God, this is the way I'm going to start compost while I'm here. Because
Okay.
this was during COVID. I was trapped. I didn't know what was up and what was down. And I can't sit around. I'm sorry, I just go crazy. So first thing I did was build a compost pile, and I took a little sand box, literally, and started putting compost and extracts on it to try to grow something. I originally started with a victory garden, and then I talked to the neighbor, and we were on this very, very questionable area. There were oil and gas wells up and down the coast of California. There used to be like every 10 feet.
Yeah.
Well, when they initially wildcat them, when they pop through and you see the oil spout out the top, what they would do is cap the well, and then they bulldoze all of that excess oil into a pile, and then they'd create these dump sites. And so in my neighborhood, they lovingly called it the Love Canal of California. That you dig down and you find these giant black pockets of this we call coal tar.
Sure.
It appears that the compound, the hydrocarbon itself, bonds together. It likes itself. So birds of a feather flock together. Because when you find some, it's not like little pieces. You find a pocket of it.
Interesting.
Maybe that's due to leaches or the way they dumped it, or the way it leached into the sand, whatever. So when I found out that I'm sitting on a potentially not so good soil to be growing things to eat in, I shifted gears, and I basically I knocked down the little veggie garden. It hadn't really gotten going, to be honest with you, and kind of just stepped back and said, I'm gonna do something with it. I don't know what yet. I eventually ended up putting a meadow in there.
Okay.
And you talk about restoring the ecosystem. Another thing that is hard to understand, but I live in basically the flats of Oxnard, which is an old floodplain for a river. That was when the Central Valley flooded and caused all the rivers to run to the ocean. This was a major one here. I mean, it's 25 miles wide or something crazy. Anyway, so it's all silt, and that's why they grow strawberries here, because they can pound the soil with NPK, till it in, and start over again, because there's just so much silt and fertility built up in the soil.
Yeah.
So we have no bugs, like none.
Nice.
The only bugs that we get are the big male mosquitoes and spiders, and maybe some of those hunter flies, the ones that spin around and look for bugs. And so our screens are always off, and doors are always open because the temperature is perfect. Everything's perfect here. But when I started to build the meadow, the first thing I noticed was all these bugs coming in, all these beneficials, like beautiful little like indigenous bees, and like multiple different species.
Build it and they will come.
Right. Yeah. And then the birds came.
Yeah.
We actually had mockingbirds, which are unbelievably beautiful sounding birds. And when that meadow did die, because my landlady sprayed it with Roundup, because she didn't like how it was unruly in her mind, we lost all the birds disappeared. And to be honest with you, I tried to bring it back, and I did, but I didn't get as many flowers, and I didn't see another mockingbird ever on that, which was really sad. But I found there's a couple in a neighborhood not too far from here, and they are the most beautiful bird. They just have all these different songs, and just really cool bird. But I'm sorry, way off topic now. Back to the
That's okay.
So the whole ecosystem came back, and is this something that you talk to your people about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've talked in recent months about grasshoppers in particular, and how most of the gardeners in my garden club and that live near me have had for 2 years, last year and this year, a big problem with grasshoppers. And I've had virtually no grasshoppers. I mean, I'll go out to the garden and I might see a couple, but they're losing crops to grasshoppers here in Colorado, which historically happens on a fairly regular basis. but I attribute it to exactly what you said. I have created a pretty large pollinator garden, but it's not just for pollinators. I grow grasses and I grow herbs and I grow flowers and I have trees, and it's to attract just the huge diversity of insect life, which brings in the birds. And I've got one birdhouse. I think it has gone through 5 generations this year, at least 4.
Wow.
And when you look at the numbers, depending on the species, but there are some species of birds that, while the chicks are in that fledgling stage, 80 to 90% of their diet is insect based. And in an area like mine, what kind of insects are appearing at that time of year? Oh, it's the nymphs of the grasshoppers and some of the young adult grasshoppers. And so I'm basically eliminating the problem before it becomes a problem, because I've got enough birds and enough predatory insects that I don't have to worry about it. And it's so simple. I do nothing. You know, it's I'm a lazy gardener. Not sure. It took time to develop the space, and it took time to plan. It took time to create it, but I do virtually nothing and have no problems. And so how good is that?
Right. And I try to tell this to people, like, especially in these monoculture environments, they're like, oh my God, there's pests, there's ants, there's bugs on the branches. And I'm like, all right, dude, they're good if they're kept in balance, because
Yeah.
they're food for something else. And that's the problem, is you are monoculture. You're not putting in any, banker plants or trap plants or pollinator gardens, or just hell, shade trees for that matter.
Yeah.
Anything that you can do to offset the fact that you're just putting one plant in here and just creating this pest pressure yourself. And
Yep.
so I love what you said, because I totally believe that. And I've witnessed it happening, within a couple of 3 months from once the garden really started to grow, they came
Yeah.
in numbers.
And I think it's a great addition to a vegetable garden. So many home gardeners spend all their time focused on the vegetable garden, and a substantial portion of that time is often dedicated to spraying the pesticides, dealing with those pests, because they've got the monocrops and all their different beds. They could spend that same amount of time just creating some of that balance. I call it equilibrium within my garden. And
Love it.
you can just step back and not have to worry. When I was managing the school garden a number of years ago, and I'm just about at that point now in my home garden, in year 4, nothing, no pests of any type. And it was purely just by creating diversity in the garden. And when I'm talking about pests, I'm talking about vegetable vegetable garden pests. None of the pirate bugs and the aphids and the squash bugs and all those other things. They're virtually gone when you build that environment.
And the other crazy part too is on the tomatoes with sand, the 3 buckets were touching, right? All 3 of them were in one little spot in a corner, out of the way, in his backyard. And the Miracle-Gro plant got decimated by hornworms.
Yeah.
They didn't go over to the MJ plant.
Yeah.
But a couple of them did eat some of the control plant, but they decimated that the one that was treated with Miracle-Gro. And so here again, like, biology. Like, if you get that plant strong enough, it's going to excrete these smells or sounds, or maybe on another level vibrations that we, don't know about. I mean, have you seen those recordings on different plants?
Well, the recordings are incredible, and also some of the research with the root communication between plants, where you have a plant that is attacked and it's not in the air. They're not detecting anything, and then you've got another plant. Primarily with trees, the research has been done. You've got a tree that is hundreds of meters away that then begins going into that defense mode that you're talking about, because of another tree that was being attacked. And so, yeah, some of that research is just incredible
Dude,
to show the communication that's happening between plants. And it's
it's
not just tree to tree. I mean, there's some research that is showing tree to grass and grass to flower, that there's that kind of communication going on as well.
I mean, we knew about the chemotaxin, right? The release of certain smells in the environment. But we didn't know about, like you're talking about, the root communications, and like when they clip the two friggin' electrodes and you hear musical sounds. Man, that it just show you how little we really know.
Yeah.
But
Now,
how,
some of that sound stuff hasn't been replicated as often as you'd like to see in studies, but I'm glad to see that more studies are being done to try to confirm what others are finding.
yeah, and there. I tend to believe that in summer of 26, we'll see another resurgence of that or technology or that
Yeah.
test status.
Yeah.
Because it's I don't care who you are. You if you watch those clips or you read the white papers, it's like, holy cow, this is like next level.
Yeah.
So
And those pheromones that you're talking about, that can cross species, and different species have different reactions when one plant starts sending the pheromones into the air. It's fascinating to me. Yeah.
Oh, we could nerd out about that forever.
Yeah.
So the other thing too is that you know how like in nature everything repeats itself, right? In different ways, shapes, and forms. Some of the stuff that Dr. James White has come out with is just really impressive about, he jumped right from horizontal gene transfer, which is when two different species of bacteria, say a bird flies over, drops some droppings, they land on the soil. The microbes in those droppings were from somewhere far away, not right there.
Mhm.
And so all of a sudden this bacteria is dropped into this new climate and really doesn't know what it's up against, what is the defenses it needs, perhaps maybe even what pH it needs to start producing to support itself. So these two cells, bacteria, come together and they exchange RNA. And this has been documented.
Yeah.
Then he dove down the rabbit hole. Well, biosymbiosis is even cooler. And I'm like, well, what the hell is biosymbiosis? And he goes, well, you know about endophytes, right? I go, yeah, they release their outer shell and the plant takes them in and they do their business and they exchange nutrients and then the plant cell spits them back out. They grow their shell, their hard shell again, or their outer shell, and then they go back out and cycle nutrients. He goes, well, we've learned recently is that the bacteria can come together and say, hey, I like you. Can I come inside? And so the other bacteria goes, okay, you gotta give me your shell because it's pure nitrogen, so it's going to make me stronger, and I'll let you in between the outer and inner layer. And so they hang out, and then at some point, the cell that let the other one in decides, okay, I got everything I need to divide. And so he lets at that point, or I shouldn't say he or she, but
Yeah. It's okay.
The one in the outer or in between the inner and outer wall is allowed to move into the nucleus and become an organelle, so a functional part of that cell. Now, when that cell actually divides,
It goes with it.
well, it turns into a new friggin' nucleus.
Yeah.
Now it's in charge of the whole cell.
Wow.
And it's a totally different species altogether.
Wow.
Right? How friggin' crazy is that?
Yeah.
Oh, I love that guy. He's hopefully going to be coming back on. I think he was traveling till September. And he and I talked about communicating in October to see when he had some time to to pop back on. I'm dying to talk to him because some of this other stuff I've been working on over the last 4 or 5 months was a grist mill. So you know what a gizzard is, right? In birds. So it grinds
and earthworms.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. Earthworms too. And alligators and crocodiles for that matter. But anyway. So I've been playing around with building this tube with a metal spiral on the inside. I'm using a 3/4 inch power drill, which is like, it'll rip your arm off if you're not careful. It's one of the really super torquey ones.
Okay.
And I put a 6-inch PVC pipe with a cap on the end. Put the spiral in the middle. It's only about an inch from the outer edge, so it sticks tight to the outer wall. It's only about an inch wide. And then I threw a bunch of different stones in there, different sizes, and played with the actual grist material.
Okay.
See what would work best. And so, as of 2 weeks ago, I started doing runs with it. There were a lot of kinks in this thing, man. From fulcrum points, because moving this around, trying to tip it and drain it and keep it upright when you're spinning it, a lot of work. Anyway, finally about 3 weeks ago, I got it to a point where I could start running and making product. And so I was just throwing my compost in there because I selected a size of stones that I was real happy with. And I was just throwing compost in there just to kind of get a feel for it, break it in, like learn different speeds. And it has forward and reverse. And so you have to decide whether I want to reverse it or forward it, and how often, what pulse, and how long. So pretty much worked all the kinks out of it. And I have a liquid solid separator. Basically what happens is the water drains from this gizzard or grist mill into a funnel that has a screen in it. So I collect any of the rocks or the thick stuff that falls out. And it goes through the screen and then pops up into the center of another tube where the liquid that's coming up from the grist mill has to bubble over and then fall down before it can come out the side. And basically what that's doing is it's basically hydrodynamics. So anything that's a little bit solid or a little bit different specific gravity will fall to the bottom where I can pull it out. But I just basically want the liquid that I can push through an irrigation tube without having any problems with plugging. And so I collected it all into this vessel. I haven't made enough to actually pull it off and put it in a 55-gallon drum, which is my goal, and then bring it to some of my local farmers to have them test it. I know the results they're going to get, but needless to say, when I microscoped it, just out of curiosity, right? Because it's a yellow color. I haven't pH'd it yet. I keep forgetting to bring my pH meter up there, but it looks like fulvic acid, that yellowy color stuff. Yeah. It's not brown like humic acid. So I scoped it, and dude, I have never in my life, and I've spent a lot of time behind the microscope, seen so many flagellates. I'm talking
really
hundreds per view. Like the whole screen, the whole view is moving. So I've been dying to get a hold of White and say, hey, dude, is it possible? Dr. White. Is it possible that in this action that I'm creating, that I'm releasing endophytes at a greater rate than I ever have with all of my other methods of extraction, mechanical extraction? So I sent off a sample to Andy Marsh. She's the soil biologist that I use to, especially when I'm working with a client and I want third-party verification that I'm not making shit up, I have her do a run. So her vial went out on Monday. So I'm hoping to hear back, went out on Friday. So I'm hoping to hear back from her toward the end of this week as to what she thinks it is. Because I don't believe it's modal bacteria, because bacteria are too small, right? I don't think that bacteria can get that big. Maybe I'm wrong, right? I don't know. They do have some weird examples of single-celled organisms that are like the size of a baseball.
Right.
It's very unusual in nature.
Yeah. That sounds interesting. I wonder what you're going to find.
I'm sitting on pins and needles waiting to find out, to be honest with you. Between trying to get a hold of James and waiting for Andy, I made the decision I was not going to reach out to James until I get her verification that they are flagellates, because I don't want to call him and send him off a rabbit hole that I'm not being responsible about analyzing the data that I have. So anyway, I will keep you posted the next time we're back on here. I'll let you know what I did. And my goal is to actually either manufacture these small scale or DIY them instructions for people to make them at home, because
Yeah.
basically you take your food waste, and something I learned today that I hadn't been doing before was something that a friend of mine, Craig, taught me, which is he was doing composting in New York City, downtown, Roxbury, not Roxbury.
Roxbury.
No, it's a very dangerous part of the city.
Okay.
In an abandoned lot. And so he would have people come in on Friday with their food waste and drop it off, and he'd have too much and he didn't know what to do with it. And he couldn't leave it out for the weekend because they'd get wrapped. Stink would be high heaven because it's the middle of summer. And, he didn't want to piss off all the neighbors. So he took it all, threw it in water, and put hardware cloth over the top, weighted it down. And that way it wouldn't begin to rot. He kind of like preserved it. And he called it making trash pickles, right? And when he took the trash pickle on Monday and poured it on compost, by the end of the week, he had fungal outbreaks, like plumes of fungi and mushrooms and everything else. So again, there's something to hydration or pre-fermentation that's happening. So on Sunday, I drove up there and I put a quarter bucket of pure mulch, like 3-inch, 4-inch, 5-inch pieces of just twisted organic matter from a grinder that grinds up green waste. This is a product that they can't really use, right? Sometimes they'll get an orchard that wants it just to kill the weeds, but for the most part, they just pile it up, and eventually it breaks down, and then they can screen it and get something out of it. But there's tons of it. So I grabbed a whole bunch of that stuff, threw it in the bucket, again, about a third full, and put a weighted rock bucket on top of it to hold it down into the water. And I went back this morning, and I took that, sopping wet material. It didn't have a bad smell, but it had a funky smell. I'll tell you that right now. I had that weird smell, and I threw it in the grist mill, and I ran it for an hour. And what came out of it was chocolate water. So like I had gotten it to the point where the grist was actually able to pull material off of it, where before, when I put in my compost, which was not like hydrophilic, but it wasn't hydrophobic, it was kind of dry. California is a nightmare to pump.
Yeah.
Absolute nightmare. You know it. You're on the west or the east side. You're on the west side of the Rockies, so you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I'm on the east side.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Oh,
yeah.
You're on the east side, not the west side.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought you were on the west side.
But I grew up in Nevada and California, so I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. It's a nightmare. So anyway, the result was 10 times better than I expected. And I didn't, unfortunately, have time to microscope it. I had a million other things to do, plus I had to get back for this. But I'll do another batch, and I will microscope that, because my gut feeling is that I'm going to have a similar reaction, where I'm going to have all of these different flagellates that are coming out from the material because they were trapped in the cellulose and lignin.
Yeah.
And the other interesting thing about this liquid solid separator was, when I first discovered the top where the flagellates were just built, millions of them, I said, you know what? I'm going to empty the bottom, because the bottom was distinctly darker in color, way more like a humic acid instead of a fulvic acid. And when I microscoped it, I did find some facultative anaerobes, stalk ciliates, which aren't bad. But I found 6 different varieties of flagellates that I did not see at the top. The top was basically one species. They all looked the same. But when I got down to that bottom layer, I had, definitely 5, if not 6, different types and different sizes, along with a couple facultative anaerobes. So that whole, again, I have so much work to do on that.
Yeah, it's going to keep you busy.
Oh, God, yeah. And then get a load of this. My buddy, who's a propulsion engineer, he used to run a frigate in the Navy. He was literally captain, Scotty. He was chief engineer. He and I have been buds for, 40 years or something crazy. Yeah, over 40 now. So he and I talk often, and I tell him about my crazy experiments and machines I'm building, like the grist mill. And he got all excited. And he's like, wow, that's really cool. And he knows what I could do to soil, because he's used my product. And he's like, you know what? What about if we did this? What if we used a 55-gallon drum I go, Mark, that's great, but I don't have the ability to weld. I don't have a metal shop. I'm a carpenter, man. I can do shit with wooden screws, but like
Yeah.
I don't have the ability to weld and deal with those kinds of weights. And I mean, imagine a 55-gallon drum full of stones and water. That's not something you just move around on a little dolly. So about a month ago, when he saw my progress, he got all excited and was like, all right, I'm going to do it. What are you going to do? He goes, I'm going to make the 55-gallon drum. I go, dude, that's a lot of work. He goes, I don't care. He goes, you're onto something here. And he's been listening to me, about the work with ESS, the Munford crew, how, I love them to death, but I fear they're trying to start a market with something huge, right? Typically you enter into a nascent market with small scale and you work your way up.
And then build up.
Yeah, build up to these monsters. Well, they're like gun-ho to sell a 25-ton-a-day system.
Wow.
That would produce enough material to treat thousands of acres, and you don't have any clients. So it's, and I've been frustrated as all hell with them. I've been begging them to let me build a mini muncher, and I keep getting told no. We're worried about, people stealing the technology, and my argument was like, well, who's going to steal your technology and reverse engineer it? A farmer or a corporation that you're trying to sell this to, right? Well, what makes more sense? But anyway, he's had to bear the burden of my frustration with their lack of letting me, on my own time with my own money, engineer another version or iteration of their original. And finally, I went to one of the principals, and basically we went toe to toe in a parking lot, and I just said, "Look, this is ridiculous. I'm not asking you to give me anything. I'm not asking you anything other than permission, so that I don't have to deal with the backlash if I do accomplish this without all of your technology." Basically, their machine is at least $1 million, if not $1.5 million, and that's the 5-ton-a-day system. The 25-ton-a-day system is between 5 and 8 million, right? Again, who can afford that? And who's going to take the risk to build one of these things without all of the clientele behind it? Like, if you produce that much, 100 totes a day, and you don't move it, that's going to cause a major problem. Like, you're going to run out of space. So needless to say, he understood my desire to make this affordable, and something that we could give or sell for cheap money to guys like you who have networks of people who, if you produced it, they would buy it. And basically all you do is you take your trimmings off of your plants, whatever food scraps you have, some compost. Doesn't even have to be good compost. It's just a carbon source.
Yeah.
And throw it in the and make this chocolate milk or chocolate water. And now you've got this stuff that acts or reacts the same as the muncher juice. So anyway, I went on a tirade there. I didn't mean to, but I really want to make something that is both affordable, deployable, because this machine, the whole thing will fit in the back of a pickup truck.
Okay.
You'll need a skid steer or a fork truck to load it and unload it, but most farmers have tractors and forks and all the stuff that you need to load and unload. And then you could literally go to any farm you wanted, make a tote full of the product, and have them run it through their pivot or their irrigation or sprinkle, spray, doesn't matter. And really start making an impact on, again, soil formation. Because you get soil functioning, man, and you know what I'm talking about. The water just sinks in, stores in the aggregates, and even if you don't get rain in the middle of the season, you're going to survive. You're going to come out the other end okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, I again didn't mean to go on a rant, but you're the kind of person that I want to.
Oh yeah, I'd love to have a system like that.
Right.
Play with.
Yeah, totally. And so one of the things that I'll do once he finishes building it, he's going to ship it out to me. I got to break it in, create SOPs for how to make it work. He basically scrapped most of these pieces out of a junkyard, which he's got access to. I mean, it's lawnmower tires, the motor he had to buy, the pulleys he had to buy, the casters he had to buy, the metal he had to buy. But again, if you're handy or you have a welder that you're friends with, and you have the pattern, the design, pretty much anybody could make it for, mere few thousand, maybe $5,000. To have someone make it and paint it and get it all sweet and perfect, well, you're gonna have to pay a little bit more for that.
Oh, sure.
But again,
That's business.
getting it into people's hands is what it's all about. So I'm really excited, and yeah, I'll probably be circling back after I get through. The way I'm looking at it, I probably got a month or two of beta testing the machine and really getting it dialed in so that I can say to people, hey, use this speed or use this pulley for this and that pulley for that. Use this much water. This is the gravel mix. This is the 3/4 inch minus or 3/4 and 3/8. So that I have all of those pieces of the puzzle figured out. But once I get all that, I'll definitely reach out because I want to get a whole bunch of letters of intent from people so that I can go back to ESS and say, here, I made this machine. This is what it does. This is how it works. Here's the people that are interested in it. Can I start manufacturing this and stamp your name on it? Again, I'm not interested in your company. I just want to be able to get up and do what I love every day.
Yeah.
You can make the money. I just want to be able to fix soil, help people get, healthy food and soil that functions. And yeah, I need a paycheck, right? I need a house over my head and food and water, but that's all I really care about at this point in life. I've already done the accumulation thing and lost it. I don't know how many times. Anyway, that's my passion. So let's get back to gardening.
Okay. Hey, that's my book.
So, talk to me. So you're doing a lot of raised beds?
Yeah. So a lot of the stuff you're talking about, the soil being poisoned by your neighbor, and the problems with all the oil wells in the area. My problems aren't nearly that bad, but the soil here in my part of Colorado is terrible. It's greatly less than 1% organic matter, very low in nutrients, compacted, more sand than anything else. And I discovered years ago that the solution is raised beds. You create a raised bed and you put the soil into it that you want to grow in, and you can bypass all of those concerns that you were talking about earlier. And so, particularly my vegetable garden, most of what I grow is in raised beds, but I've also expanded into flowers and fruit bushes and lots of other options. This is Mala saying hello. But yeah, I do a lot of gardening in raised beds. And when the publisher contacted me asking me to write a book, that's the book we decided to do, was Raised Bed Gardening.
And that's out now for purchase?
Yeah. It came out earlier in the year. It's available anywhere books are sold. And Gardener Scott's Guide to Raised Bed Gardening by Scott A. Wilson. And it's more than raised beds. The approach I took, this is a reference book, but it's also a tutorial. So I cover soil development. One of the biggest chapters, it talks about soil, my recipe for creating a good soil. It talks about compost. I also use Mel Bartholomew, Square Foot Gardening. I talk about his recipe for what he fills raised beds with, and Joe Lample's perfect soil mix that he uses to fill his raised beds. And so the soil is a big part of it. But I also talk about how to choose your seeds and how to plant and how to take care of the plants and how to do trellises and how to harvest. So it's a full year's worth of what you can be doing in the garden, with a focus on using raised beds because of many of the benefits that raised beds can bring to gardeners.
So it's basically like a handbook. You got it all covered.
Yeah. It's everything that I just talked about and more, of course. And the idea is exactly that. You watch a video like this and go, oh, soil, and then you turn to Gardener Scott's chapter on soil and say, well, so how is he building his soil, and how are these other people putting the soil, and what's the ratios of the different ingredients when you are making your own soil. But I also talk about if you buy your soil, if you buy soil in bulk, then how you can use that in garden beds as well. And then I want to plan a garden. So I have a number of pages that actually have charts. If you want to maximize the number of plants growing in a bed, it's not a grid. So square foot gardening is a nice grid based system, which works. But I show how if you use a diamond pattern, if you break it into triangles, you could actually fit more plants in the same space. And so it's a handbook for as deep as you want to dig with your gardening, or as light as you want to keep it with just keeping the basics in mind.
Awesome. That is fantastic. I'm so glad you told me about that because I have a few different people that have approached me about gardening. I'm like, guys, I'm sorry, but I'm really a soil biologist and a soil engineer. That's what I do. Like I don't grow much. Like I'll grow flowers and pollinator gardens, but my focus is more on trying to keep up with what's going on in the biological world. I mean, that's full-time job as it is.
Oh, sure.
So it'd be great to have that resource. So I'm going to keep that in mind because I do get hit up a lot about.
I talk about garden journals. I give examples of how you can create your own garden journal, the kind of things, the data you should be collecting within your garden on a regular basis. So it's got something for guys like you that like the data. I show exactly the kind of data that you need to be aware of within your garden so that you don't make the same mistake over again, and that you can capitalize on your successes.
Oh God, that's the hardest part with most humans. It's like, well, I'm not gonna let him tell me how to do it. I'm gonna figure it out, right? It's like, no, don't go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, I share a lot about the mistakes that I've made and some of the things that I've learned from. But a big part of it is just, before I became a master gardener a little over 20 years ago, I didn't know about raised beds, really. I just did it the way everybody does it, which is you dig in the ground and put a plant in and hope for the best. And once I found out, particularly in an environment like mine, where the soil is so bad, raised beds can be a solution. But it carries over to pest control and disease control and protecting from the weather. I mean, there's a lot of benefits that raised beds can bring to the garden.
Yeah, that's another huge problem out here is ground squirrels. I don't know. Do you have ground squirrels?
Yeah, I do have some ground squirrels. My biggest issue is gophers, and I've got voles. And so I show that in the book. The book also, there's a section that talks about all the different types of raised beds, and I give examples. And then there's a section with 7 different beds with a how-to step-by-step photo guide of how to build a wood bed, a steel bed, a rock bed, a concrete block bed. But as part of that section, when you build your bed, underneath all of my beds, I've got hardware cloth because if I grow in an open bed, that the animals are going to come in and eat the plants. But put hardware cloth underneath the raised bed, and you stop the burrowing animals from coming in. Put a hoop over the bed and cover that hoop with bird netting. And now you can keep the deer out, you can keep the birds out, you can keep the squirrels out. And so each of my beds is essentially a self-contained system that's protected from all sides from any of those potential harm to my plant.
Fantastic, man. You really did get into the whole picture.
Oh, yeah.
Because there was a guy I did the orchard restoration for up here. He had 2 raised beds and he ordered like, I don't know, 10 more. And he hired a gardener who came out and planted it with vegetables and stuff. And I'm always curious when I was talking with her, I'm like, hey, is there anything underneath these? And she's like, well, no, I don't think so. I go, oh, that's a big mistake. She goes, why? I go, do you see all the holes around here? She goes, yeah, I noticed. They really got a bad ground squirrel problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, well, if you don't do something, man, they're going to just have a buffet out of here.
Yeah.
And guess what happened?
Yeah.
Decimated it. Yeah. And she was horribly frustrated, and she didn't know how to approach the owner or the landscape architect. I was like, you know what? Don't worry about it. I'll talk to him about it. And so I made a point. I'm like, look, this is a problem. And she's even tried capturing them. Like she had those safe habitat ground squirrel catchers, the bait traps all over the place. And those suckers are so smart, they don't go near them. So, she had tried the approach of trying to correct the imbalance without killing the animal. And obviously it didn't work. And so I basically explained to him, I go, first of all, I go, what you guys dumped in that raised bed is dirt. It's not soil. And so even if she did successfully grow without the ground squirrels eating the roots of every plant that she planted, you would have gotten a minimal harvest and marginal plant growth and yield. And so he's like, yeah, all right, can you mix up a batch for me? And I'll have the guy that built them all put hardware cloth on the bottom of them all before he delivers. And so guess what? It worked.
Yeah. It's as simple as that.
Right. Although she didn't put any hoops over it. And so that's another great idea, because she did have deer pressure and she did have birds eating the berries. And some of them did get smart enough to hop up and nip off fruiting branches. So that's next level.
Yeah. Well, and I use cattle panel hoops. So I bend the cattle panel. It's a 4-gauge steel. And so once you bend it, it stays and holds that shape. And I'll keep those hoops over my beds pretty much throughout the year. And you can vary it. So if I'm trying to keep an insect pest out of my garden early in the year so they don't lay eggs, then you put an insect fabric over the hoop. And then you want to keep the deer and those kind of animals out, you put bird netting. And in my area where we get a ton of thunderstorms, you put hailcloth over it. And if it gets really hot during the summer and it's dry and it's windy and that sun just bakes the plants, you put shade cloth over it. So I just am a huge advocate of using a hardy hoop like that. And then because it's a raised bed, it's a specific dimension, you can cut all of those materials to size and you just swap them out. I just use spring clamps to hold them in place. And of course, I show all that in my book, but it is such an easy, effective way to deal with the potential problems in the garden that that's why I wrote a book, because I think more people should do it.
Damn, that is next level. All of the variables that you've got. You could probably even get pollen cloth if you didn't want any pollination to happen.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Well, listen, I don't normally do this, but you've got 10 questions, my friend. So we normally break in about 18 minutes, but let's go ahead and break now, because often those questions lead to other conversations. And
we can cover 1 or 2 or 3, whatever we can get through. Maybe we can try to keep it short.
Yeah. Well, let's try to get through them all. It's one of the things that I really like to do for the guests is give them an opportunity to ask the guest, the questions that they want most to be answered. So welcome back, Ken.
Is my mic okay this time? I had to I literally had to restart my computer partway through the show because I was having issues, but we'll just jump on this one right away here. I make and use my own compost, but putting excessive amounts of compost into my soil can apparently be detrimental. I'm looking for a bit more scientific understanding.
So scientifically, that's exactly what happens. You get a nutrient overload, basically. And so the compost begins to add, nitrogen is always the nice thing, but nitrogen leaches out of the soil. When you start talking about the NPK with the phosphorus and the potassium and the potassium, I don't want to go into cation exchange and all that kind of stuff, but basically it locks to the soil. And those aren't the only nutrients that lock in the soil. So if you keep introducing those macronutrients in particular, they can create a barrier. The plant will actually take up too much of a macronutrient and not absorb some of those micronutrients or some of the other macronutrients. And it's not like you're poisoning the plant. You're just preventing the plant from feeding. And that's what happens when you use too much compost. You actually can get to that point where it's an imbalance with too much. And so scientifically, that's when the only way to find that out is to do a soil analysis and find out what the levels are within your soil. And it typically happens at about the 5-year point. If you do a lot of regular amending with compost at about the 4 or 5-year point, you've got enough. You don't need to do more. And if you keep going to 6 and 7 and 8 years and do the analysis, you'll find an imbalance.
Yeah, we call that nutrient lock, where
yeah, exactly.
you block the plant from getting everything it needs. So, and I'm glad you asked that, Silly. It's a great question. I mean, as a soil engineer, I've been forced to engineer different soils when architects get stupid and inappropriately plant things next to each other that they shouldn't be. They don't live like that in nature. And I got to a point where I made a horrible mistake in doing just that. And I created the soil that was sticky. It was tacky. It held way too much moisture. Like they watered it once, and I went back a week later, and it just was sticky, like literally sticky and tacky. And that plant that was in that bed did not do well at all, and it ended up being actually replaced. So great question and great answer, Scott.
Thanks.
Okay, our next one. I'm hoping to move my raspberry patch to a row system. When would be the best time, spring or autumn?
I do both. In fact, I just transplanted some raspberries a couple weeks ago. The key is your climate. And so I do most of my moving in spring as the plants are waking up. You can do it when they're dormant, but you don't necessarily know where they are. So I use it as a great method. I've got a video that shows the reason I do it is when the raspberry patch starts spreading outside the borders that you've defined. As soon as those little plants begin popping up and you see those brand new green leaves, I dig those plants up and I move them to a new area. And so they're getting established before the hot sun sets in. They're taking advantage of the cooler spring weather so that they're not as stressed in that transplanting mode. So that's when I do most of it. But in the fall, like now, early fall, you'll see some of those plants beginning to pop up because the raspberry continues to spread, or maybe some of the plants that you didn't move earlier in the year and they're a little bit bigger, you can still dig them up when they're big. Just try to get as many roots as you can. Just avoid the summer. The stress of transplanting in summer, like most of us know, is not good for plants. But whenever you've got time to do it, that's a good time to do it.
So do they throw more roots constantly, or do you have to?
Oh yeah. In fact, I moved some of my raspberry plants to a whole new area where I'm basically creating the apple tree guilds, part of the permaculture concept. And so I've added some raspberries near my apple trees. And the soil, I didn't do anything to the soil other than it's been mulched 5 or 6 inches deep with wood chips for about 4 years now. And the plants are doing great. And I noticed just this week that I have one of those little plants popping up 6 feet away from the nearest raspberry plant. So I'm not sure, I didn't dig into the mulch. I'm not sure if that lateral root was traveling underneath the mulch layer, and so it was moving quickly, or if it was moving through the soil and just took that long to get there. But I've got a whole bunch of raspberries 5 and 6 feet away from my main patch.
Damn. So they have like a tuber system.
Yeah, it's not a tuber, but it's that same basic idea. It will send a root out for 6 or 8 inches typically, and then you might have a cane sprout from there. That's typical, and I don't know why, but occasionally it will just keep growing laterally, and 3 or 4 feet out, it sends out the cane. And then the energy from the mother root is focused on that new cane. And so that cane will grow. And once it gets established, then the root just keeps growing. And so it is a linear root. And when you go to dig out and replant, you just follow the root. You dig one, and then you follow it to the next, and you follow it to the next, and you follow it to the next. And you'll have a handful of plants that are all linked a pretty straight line with the same root.
So that's why in nature you typically find them in patches.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Interesting. Well, that's a good lesson on raspberries right there.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll jump to the next one. Is there a stopping time in the season for soil drenching with compost extract? It's not yet freezing. When to stop, or freezing at night? Does the temperature determine when to stop? I still have fall crops going.
So a lot of it depends on why you're doing it. So when I was talking earlier about taking that extract and pouring it on my raspberries, I did that early in the year because I just wanted to add some of what I now know to call the either a liquefied biologic, or
Dissolved organic matter.
dissolved organics. I mean, there's a lot of ways to look at it, but I just wanted to add some of that material to my raspberries early in the spring to kind of jumpstart the soil life, to give it something to feed on. And yes, with the changing temperature in the fall, particularly in an area like mine, when it gets cold and it freezes, and it sounds like you got freezing conditions too, all of that slows down. But you can still do it in the fall. You might not get a quick reaction. The key is that the soil life has to take those dissolved organics and break it down further into the nutrients that plants can use. And that takes some time, and that slows down in cooler weather. But it doesn't always stop. And those organics are still there, so that as soon as everything wakes up in spring, you've got that kickstart ready to go. So it gets back to, if you got the time to do it, go ahead and do it. I'd rather apply organic material like that in the fall, even if it is the dissolved organics, knowing that it's not going to be used by the plants for another 6 months when my winter is finally done, than to leave it sitting in a bucket for 6 months and basically just enriching the air above the bucket.
Yep.
That was awesome. Oxidizing and losing it.
Yeah.
So interestingly enough, I did a project on a hayfield in Connecticut that was extremely wet. The farmer had real problems because he couldn't get out there to fertilize or reseed or anything till like summertime, because it was just so much groundwater, and he didn't want to spend the expense of tiling it. So what I taught him to do was to spread all of the compost on frozen ground.
Sure.
And that worked. I mean, it was perfect. So Dr. Lane did a series of studies in Wyoming back when she first got together with her husband, where she went out to these fields in the dead of winter and would shovel all the snow off, and then take a core sample of the soil and keep it frozen until she got back to the lab. And what she noticed was, even though it was frozen solid in a cooler, it hadn't had a chance to thaw because she got a thermometer on it. When she opened it up, there was an aqueous layer between the snow and the frozen ground that was loaded with biology, like over the top. So it's
crazy to think that that your soil is not frozen on the surface when it has snow on it.
Right?
Yeah.
It is. And for whatever reason, there's this like separation zone or easy zone, for the biologics. And maybe they're so concentrated that they create enough kinetic energy that it doesn't freeze to the soil or melt or stick to the snow above it. So
yeah, I saw an explanation once that talked about the thermodynamics, just the amount of energy that it takes for water to change state. And that was a big factor. There just wasn't enough energy in either the snow or the ground, the cold ground, to produce the change so that water would freeze.
So here's a really cool question, Scott. You've got forests around you, right?
Not exactly around me, but yes, near me.
So have you ever noticed the phenomenon where in the winter, the soil heaves and it
Oh yeah.
creates beautiful ice sculpture, like ice caves.
Oh yeah.
Isn't
Yeah.
that amazing?
Yeah. And you know, from a gardener's perspective, that frost heave can actually be a problem because it can cause the bulbs to fly out of the ground depending on where it happens. So snow is actually a beneficial thing because it tends to stabilize the temperature, and you don't have those heaves. But I've seen, not to that degree like you're talking about in the forest, but even within my garden, I occasionally see heaving like that.
Interesting. Yeah, it always blew my mind to think that with all of that oxidative stress, you know, the air, cold, dry air moving through those ice crystals, that in summer or in spring, the melt, the mud season, whatever you want to call it, that it would collapse back down and still support biological and plant life.
Yeah.
It just blew my mind. A little off topic there, but
It's okay.
Just think of the experiment the NASA did where they put the biology outside of the space station, you know, and then brought it back in, warmed it up, and the life came back and had no problems carrying on. It was just a crust on the outside that died. Everything else, you know, just went into cyst until it warmed back up. And that's what our winters are, especially up here in Canada too.
Yeah.
So this is kind of similar to one of our earlier questions. Can you overdo organics in the garden environment? I know potatoes will grow perfectly well in pure compost, but different plants have different needs.
Yeah, a lot of it depends on the compost. You know, for the most part, if you've got a balanced compost, there's going to be a lot of nutrients, and you get, you know, something like the tubers, the potatoes, they'll do okay in a single season. Not all plants do well when they're grown in 100% compost. And kind of what Leighton had talked about as well. You can have that problem where, you know, you have terrible soil in your bed and your plant is going to grow but not do well. It's the same in a 100% compost environment, depending on the nutrients, of course, in the compost. The plant's going to grow, but it might not do as well. And so when you look at the potatoes in particular, how good does the plant grow? You're getting the potatoes, you're getting the tuber development, but the plant itself might actually be struggling in an environment like that.
that's a great
It's all
answer.
about the biology and the cell division. And if you've got too much of a good thing, it can be really bad. But if you're lacking any biology, you can't even have cell division or plant growth. So if you can raise the biology up to the point where it can actually use all that material quickly, then you're going to have a lot more cell growth.
Yeah.
And I think another thing that should be pointed out too is that it depends on how chunky your compost is.
Sure.
So if you have a lot of big wood chips that can't hold a lot of moisture, it's not going to get mushy, and it is going to create a little bit of aeration. But I would stick to Scott's answer that, you know, there's a difference between medicine and poison, right? It's just the dosage.
Yeah.
Yep. So, Farmer Cheryl, what are the advantages in using raised beds opposed to growing in the ground?
So disadvantages. So actually, in my book, I cover a lot of disadvantages. When I originally, so the book took about 2 years to write, and when I originally wrote it, I had a chapter on the advantages and I had a chapter on the disadvantages, and I came up with 50 advantages and I came up with 30 disadvantages. So, you know, there's not enough time to cover everything. And when the book actually, when we put it together, we incorporated them together. So we would do kind of a pro and con. One of the biggest disadvantages that people tend to focus on is the cost. You can grow in the ground, and if you've got good soil already, then you don't have to worry about creating a raised bed and paying to do a raised bed. Now, the counter to that is you don't have to pay to build a raised bed. You can use reclaimed wood. You can do hugelkultur methods. You can have lots of options where you're not spending money. But that's one of the biggest disadvantages. Depending on where you live, they dry out faster. So here in Colorado, my raised beds do require more water than my in-ground beds. because they're surrounded by the heat and the wind, and they dry out. But that could be an advantage if you live in a really rainy environment where you need the drainage and you don't want to garden in a soggy patch. Raised beds can be something that's an option. So there's a lot of options where the advantage and the disadvantage are just a mirror image depending on where you live. But there's just a couple that I'll point out there. It's a personal perspective as whether you see it as a disadvantage or not. And the disease, for instance, if you have a disease that moves into a bed, then that bed is infected, period. And the nice thing about that is none of the other beds would be infected because they're separate beds. But that is a disadvantage, is you now have to recognize that you can't grow in that bed anymore. And it's kind of localized when you have a pest or a disease problem.
And the cure to that is called competition, right? Especially if it's a biological fungal.
Sure.
You just get a really good compost extract in there and you nuke it.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what I like to do, is let the biology bring everything back to equilibrium.
Love
all
the word
about the biology.
Yeah, I love the word equilibrium. That's a great way of saying balance.
So Scott, I think you have to run now?
Yeah, you've seen my dog jump up a couple times. She's just reminding me what time it is because it's getting close to feeding time. Actually, we're past feeding time, but that's okay.
Well, I'm glad we started the questions early. I apologize to the 5 that we didn't get to, but we did get through the first 5, which was fantastic. Great questions, audience. And hey, Scott, thank you so much for the time you give us. Really appreciate you coming on here and chopping it up for an hour and a half. And please, audience, get his book. It sounds like you guys, but there's way more in that book than he had an opportunity to talk about. So
yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's more than 300 pages. So when I say it's a reference book, it's hundreds of pages, and it's got more than 300 photos with the how-tos. But I show beds that you've never even. One of the things that really resonates with people, and as I've been on different shows and people have read the book and asking me questions, I show how to build an herb spiral, basically a vertical tower out of stone that is a raised bed. And most people aren't even aware that those exist. And so, there's a lot of different pictures, different options of raised beds that you might not have ever even considered in a garden. And it goes well beyond just a 4-foot by 8-foot wooden box.
Wow.
Fantastic.
Very cool.
Well, thank you guys. Appreciate your time and appreciate you having me on. And we might have to do this again sometime.
Amen. Please. Always a pleasure.
Okay, everybody, we'll end the podcast here. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you on Wednesday with me and Andy.